I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room. We're going to share an excerpt from this week's Dispatches from Planet Albany discussion, where we talked with Politico New York's Albany bureau chief, Nick Reisman, about his extended one-on-one sit-down earlier this month with Governor Kathy Hochul. The interview sheds light on how the state's chief executive utilizes and thinks about power, and how she navigates major political personalities like President Donald Trump and New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani. So what does your prep look like, and what are you trying to accomplish when you go into one of these interviews?
Prep, I just wing it.
Sure,
no, that's not
to a certain degree, though.
Well, you have to. But let me back up. Yes, there is a significant amount of prep time. You do have these, or at least I try to have these outlines going into these interviews where I'm thinking up questions, and I kind of have like a running list of questions that I keep for the governor should the opportunity arise to talk to her. And when you set up an interview like this, you kind of want to have a couple goals in mind. You want to get her on news of the day, and then you also kind of want to get her on just how she's kind of viewing the current political moment. Just where does she see herself fitting into where the political environment is currently, and it seems kind of obvious to me where she is right now, where she's kind of in this strange in-between position. You've got Donald Trump back in the White House, who has clearly shown a desire to shape and influence, meddle in the affairs of his native state. And then you've got Mayor Zohran Mamdani in New York City, who has harnessed a lot of economic populism on the left. And in some respects, Trump and Mamdani, they get along very well together. In some respects, they're kind of two symptoms of a very similar situation right now in American politics, where voters have turned to outsiders who are not traditional politicians, who have this populist rhetoric on the right and on the left, and they've got very ardent supporters and very passionate detractors. Kathy Hochul does not fit into either of these lanes. She's a moderate Democrat, very traditional institutionalist Democrat in many respects, and she has to work with both these guys. And it's a bit of a tightrope that she's on at the moment. So, when I pitched this interview to the governor's team, it was basically just kind of like, look, she got a lot of wins in this budget, which objectively she did. She got her budget, regardless of how you felt about the process this year, regardless of how you felt about the tactics that she used in order to get what she wanted, how late this budget was. On paper, she got her victories, and she can now run for re-election touting those victories. So, when you look at the fact that she had this budget done, and she also is kind of now transitioning to a much more political moment as she's also running for re-election, it seemed like the time was ripe to kind of get her on where things stand at this very moment, and luckily for me, they accepted.
You did solicit what I thought was a pretty interesting sense of how the governor thinks about her negotiating. And in the course of the interview, you brought up the immigration reforms included in the state budget and how we got to this final package of changes in light of some in the legislature wanting more bold action. And there was this answer from the governor that I want to read. She said, quote, "I had already explained what I was going to support. It was very expansive, more than other states have done, and people just thought they would get to a different place with me, and they didn't. And I think we lost too much time on that. That should have happened in January," speaking about action in the wake of some deaths in Minnesota. That feels very emblematic of the negotiating style more broadly from the governor, but what do you think?
Right. I mean, the governor, I think, thinks of herself as someone who can be very resolute when it's necessary. And, while that quote may suggest that she kind of dug in on this front, it's worth pointing out that she was willing to negotiate with the legislature. There was a moment there, I think it was back in April, early May, and I'm going to get my timeline messed up here because everything's just so condensed over the last 6 months or so. But there was a moment there where it appeared that negotiations over the immigration package had blown up because the governor was not willing to accept New York for All, which would have had greater limitations on how agencies like ICE can coordinate with local police departments. And the governor came out at a news conference and did something that she is usually, and she says that she is loath to do this, which is negotiate in the press. And she wound up negotiating in the press by basically going out there and saying, I'm willing to make a series of, she never said concessions, but in some respects they were. She acquiesced to certain bills, including one that prevents law enforcement from wearing masks. That was a change. That was news. And so she was trying to meet the legislature halfway on this, but the legislature was dug in on their version of New York for All, not the governor's package, which he has called Local Cops, Local Crimes. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of a revelatory moment because it did speak to the governor's frustration with an issue that very early on she did try to lead with. She came out in January on a number of those bills that were kind of meant to protect undocumented immigrants living in New York in the wake of what we saw in Minneapolis. And I think she did want to have a quick victory on something like that, get it done outside of the budget. Yeah. But as so is often the case in Albany, in the state capitol, these things do get rolled into the budget negotiations, and ultimately probably was a little bit more helpful for the governor to use that budget as the vehicle to get what she wanted on the immigration front.
Yeah, because so many Democratic lawmakers who identify as progressives were holding their nose on certain issues because they said, well, I need to bring home immigration reform or pension reform. And speaking to the governor's interest in doing this as a standalone bill, they even came out with text as program bills, which they don't normally do when they say, oh, we're pushing for X, Y, Z.
Right.
And that's more talk. And this, I think, spoke to how serious it was.
It's also worth keeping in mind, too, that what the governor was able to get on this was fairly significant compared to other, like even blue states that were responding to this. You know, some Democratic governors, like in Virginia and New Jersey, were issuing these executive orders. I think Illinois also had some executive orders as well. This was legislation, and it has gone further than other blue states have been willing to go on something like this. So there was, it was fairly significant. It was also fairly significant for a governor who, when you look at the scope of her career, has been kind of hesitant to get into a fight like this.
Something you brought up in the interview.
Something I mentioned, back when you were the Erie County clerk, she became notable statewide when she opposed Eliot Spitzer's plan for driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants. Now, that's a position she has changed. She changed when she was lieutenant governor when Andrew Cuomo was pursuing a similar policy. But when you look at the scope of her career, it is relatively cautious. She's a very careful politician. So when she saw an opportunity like this as the unrest in Minneapolis was kind of unraveling, it's pretty significant, and I think that is worth pointing out.
Does she give you the stink eye when you begin to mention her time as Erie County clerk, or does she remain pretty unmoving and unwavering?
No, she nodded. She nodded. Okay. I mean, she fully acknowledges that things can change over 20 years.
And she said that publicly, talking about it. One other follow-up on the immigration front, she relays in your interview some of the information that the president has conveyed to her about what he's willing to do and not willing to do on immigration. And I'm curious, when she tells Trump's sides of these conversations, does she do a Trump voice, or is she still doing Kathy Hochul?
She's been careful to not really be all that revelatory about what she and Trump say when they're talking on the phone,
including his tone,
or the handful of interviews or the handful of discussions that she's had with him in the Oval Office, and she's met with him twice in the Oval. No, I've not heard her do a Trump impersonation. She's not someone who does voices, I've noticed.
I haven't seen that from her, and it's probably for the best.
Yeah, I think it's probably a good policy for us all. You know, not just governors or elected officials, but it's probably good to leave the impersonations to SNL.
Well, turning then to the other side of the coin that you highlighted, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, I think unsurprisingly in hindsight, he enjoyed a very good working relationship with this governor throughout the entire session. They found things to partner on where they overlap: child care, funding for New York City and addressing their fiscal woes. But you also asked about next year. and specifically the potential for the Big Apple to seek additional special treatment in the budget. What was your takeaway from the governor's answer on that?
Well, I asked her, is there going to be a different dynamic next year after all of this help that she gave the mayor and New York City with extra cash, like literally like direct cash, expanding no-cost childcare, which is an issue that he ran on and is one that's very important to her, and also the pied-à-terre surcharge, enabling this. I think it's about $500 million on the high end, on the estimate, on the
Sure. If it all
optimistic.
goes well.
If on the optimistic projection on this is $500 million a year for the pied-à-terre, and that was something that she calculated herself and brought to the mayor. So there was a substantial degree of help that the state, through Kathy Hochul, offered to the Mamdani administration this year. So I said, given all of that, is there going to be a different dynamic for the mayor next year? And she told me, and you have it in front of you, so and I do not, but she told me something to the effect of they manage the budget now.
Basically verbatim, Nick. Nice recall.
But she said they manage the budget now. And she has said versions of this in the past, to be fair. She said this back in March before the pied-à-terre was put together. But now that the state budget is done, now that the city budget is being put together and is due, I believe, July 1st, obviously the calculations are going to be changing here a little bit. And the state does have some of its own issues that it has to take care of next year. She very, very much seemed to suggest that, this was help that was necessary, she said, because of the financial picture that Mamdani inherited from Eric Adams. And that going forward, this is year one, year two, you're going to have to kind of stand this up on your own. Now, the question that I have, and I think that's one that we're not going to get fully answered until next year, is, does Mamdani's posture with Governor Hochul change next year? Will he be a lot more vocal for her to do a broad-based tax increase on very rich people and corporations? We're talking like an income tax increase on large companies and the extraordinarily wealthy in New York. And that remains to be seen, because during this time, Mamdani could have come up to Albany and really made a big case for raising taxes, raising income taxes, and he didn't. He chose to not do that. He chose to kind of remain in the background, and it kind of short-circuited that tax the rich campaign that was being conducted. So will it be different when the governor, if she wins re-election this year, is next year in her second full term, not facing that kind of political pressure in an election season? Will she be facing some real pressure from the mayor to do so? And we won't really know that until probably this time next year.
And I think how the November elections shake out would probably inform how aggressive the governor, assuming she gets reelected, chooses to be. I mean, if she squeaks by with 52%, maybe she's looking for new allies, or maybe she gets more re-entrenched. If she gets 60-plus percentage points, maybe she does something else. And that was an excerpt of our insider political discussion for Dispatches from Planet Albany with Politico New York's Albany bureau chief, Nick Reisman. To hear the entire conversation, where we also explore how Governor Kathy Hochul will try to score points on cost of living issues while avoiding blame for rising prices, check out Dispatches from Planet Albany wherever you download podcasts or at capitalpressroom.org. Thanks for listening to today's edition of the Capitol Press Room. For an insider take on what's happening in state government, check out our Dispatches from Planet Albany show, available wherever you get podcasts or at capitalpressroom.org.
Join us again for Capitol Press Room, a production of WCNY Connected, Syracuse.